These formula here should be familiar from last lesson. You were using these formula for individual shareholders. But what we're doing now is you can actually apply these formulae to the whole company to see where the money is going between their shareholders. So what we're looking at is looking at the profit distribution of a whole company, but still using those same two formula here. So I don't need you to copy these down. I've got these here again because we're referring back to what we did last lesson. The important stuff to get is the thinking order. When you're doing these questions about profit distribution, you need to think things out in a particular order. So think about how much profit is actually going to the shareholders as dividends. Deal with the preference shareholders first. And then after that, the ordinary shareholders get the leftover profit. So you got writing time for this little bit here because you already have these two formula for last lesson. If you get that early, get the example down. When you've got numbers with all those zeros, it might be a good idea to add commas. Or for the German people, you use the period sign. So I'll split the lesson up in two today. After I've done this example, you'll work on profit distribution questions for 40 minutes, and I'll check your books for practice evidence. Then I'll teach yield. Then the rest of the time is to finish that off and check your practice. A company has share capital. It's made up of 1 million $2 par value preference shares. That's important information. It's made up of 5 million ordinary shares. They've made a profit of 1.2 million here. They're hanging on to 30% of that. And they're also hanging on to 150 grand for replacing assets. Any thoughts? How would I work out how much of the profit is actually going to the shareholders? Is all of it going to the shareholders? No? What?
First of all, we take the profit, multiply that by the tax, percentage for the tax, so 0.3.
So he's working out what 30% of the profit is, because 30% of that is going to be kept for tax purposes. 360 grand. 3 360 grand for tax. Is there any maths that needs to be done for the other thing that they're hanging on to, or is it just a number?
Yep, just a
It's
number.
just a number. So how do I work out what's left for to be shared with people? Yeah.
That will be the 1,200,000. Take 360,000. Take 150,000.
150 grand equals take 150. So the shareholders, for their dividends, they're going to share a cake of 690. Nice. 1,000 between them. B. Why do we do the preference shareholders first? Are they better? They're preferred. They get their money first. And if there's nothing left over, the ordinary people get nothing. Okay? So preference shareholders, how many preference shares are there? There's 1 million. So div paid for the preference people is going to be 1 million times by the par value times by, what's 10% as a decimal?
0.1.
0.1. 1 million times by 2 times by 0.1. So 200 grand is going to go to all the preference shareholders. To pref. C. Find the dividend per share paid per ordinary share. We don't have the info to work that out straight away because last lesson, div per share equals div paid over number of shares. We know the number of ordinary shares. Do we currently know what those 5 million people are going to be sharing?
No.
I've got what I need to find that. Okay? So 200,000 is going to go to the preference shareholders out of the 690 grand. So I need to subtract 690,000, take away the 200,000 is going to be 490 grand goes to ordinary people. That's the whole chunk. That's what's going to all the ordinary people. How do we work out what each little piece is going to be there? Yep.
We're going to divide the total amount that's going to the ordinary people by the amount of ordinary shares. In this case,
which is 5 million. 490 grand over 5 million. So each person is going to get 9.8 cents. So we've just done C, and then just like in your test, the last question is going to be, okay, let's pretend that you were a shareholder that had 2,000 preference shares, 5,000 ordinary shares. You're just hammering those two formula from last lesson again. So pref is going to be 2,000 preference shares times by, they had a par value of 2, and they had a rate of 10%. They're going to get $400 dividend from their preference shares. And then ordinary is going to be, how many ordinary they have? They have 5,000 times by, then 9.8 cents per share. $490. So if you're a person in this situation, your total would be 890 total. You didn't sell the shares, it just went to your bank account. Okay? So that is dealing with those formula from last lesson, but on a company-wide basis versus just the shareholders. Okay? So I'm going to leave you alone for, let's say, half an hour to do these 30 minutes, and I'll call you out one by one to check your book work.